Hey guys, welcome to a special discussion segment episode of Roll for Crit. Today we're going to be talking about the games industry at large, inspired by a couple of articles that were released in the last week or so. The first one comes from Jamie Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games, in which he talks a lot about their recent release Wingspan, and in general how the supply and demand chain works between consumers, publishers, retailers, manufacturers. And then the other one by Ignacy Trzewiczek from Portal Games, talking about reprints of games and how it's difficult to find older games that are no longer in print because retailers and distributors are not as interested in carrying those older titles. And we thought both of them are kind of related. There's some interesting topics to discuss there, and we'll have links in the description below, so I recommend before you watch us talk about it, definitely read both of those articles straight from the source so you have an idea of what we're going to discuss. But that's the general gist of it, and I think this is a topic that we've talked a lot about, how there just seems to be this weird thing in the board game industry because games are physical components, because they're so big and unwieldy and hard to predict how much people are going to want to buy, where games sometimes are hard to find. You don't know how many there are going to be there. You don't know, how long it's going to take, even when the initial release is necessarily going to be. And we're coming from, we have experience ourselves as retailers, so we've experienced some of this firsthand. So what were your thoughts upon reading these articles?
They're very interesting because the Stonemaier one is more from the perspective, I think, with a newer game, this issue, when Trzewiczek's is more of an older game.
Sure.
So we can sort of see both sides. And looking at Stonemaier's first, he talks about how Wingspan, they talk to distributors on how much they think they should make, give them an estimate, way off.
Right.
In the sense that more demand instead of less demand.
They underestimated how much people would want the game.
Right. And they mentioned both. And that's an issue because when you look at a lot of other things, you mentioned it, this isn't some like a video game which you can just print on a disc or a digital format.
Or a movie.
Not only that, 10,000 units of a Blu-ray or video game take up a lot less space than 10,000 units of Wingspan.
That is for sure.
So that's another big issue.
Yeah.
And I get part of it also is, so it's very worrisome from both the retailer and distributor. Back when we talked a bit more with our distributors of like, if something didn't sell, then you just have like a shelf space that's just blocked off.
Yeah, and on the other side, I remember plenty of times when we want to get the newest, hottest game, and they're like, we can give you 3 of them, or sometimes 1 of them. And it was just like, okay.
Well, it's even crazy. Like he mentions that some retailers will take pre-orders before they know their allotment.
Right. That's a bit of a risk that you take, but it's tough. They want to get an idea of demand because they want to know how much they should buy. Like everybody wants to sell the right amount and not go over. We talked about, obviously, with video games or movies, it's much easier because you can just print them, it's faster, there's no actual manufacturing that really goes into it besides like they have a mold for a case and that's it. Whereas board games are so specialized, everything's different.
We should speak on Trzewiczek's article where he mentions how he talked with a publisher, but in particular the game he uses as an example, not related to that publisher, is Lewis and Clark, one which I remember selling, but we didn't play. And he said it's one of his favorite Euro games, but his friend never heard of it because it's out of print now and almost impossible to get. Which is definitely, I think, a huge issue because there's plenty of games I know we haven't get that now. I remember before Restoration Games, Fireball Island, how many pieces were going for hundreds of dollars, I feel like.
Right. Yeah, it's a really tough thing because it's kind of like the equivalent of, I'm trying to think of equivalent in other industries because it's hard.
Well,
there isn't as much.
I think what comes to mind for me is I have a lot of collectors for Transformer toys or any kind of things like that, And if you weren't there around 1988 or something to get the toy, you may never have gotten it, and or convention exclusives and things like that. The difference is, I think, with board games, especially now, is as Trzewiczek said in his article, is this game's 5 years old. That's like a decade. I think some other things have much larger print runs that are around when board games, because they're so easily printed by smaller companies and people, especially through Kickstarter, which we'll ignore that for a little bit right now, there might be one and done. It's gone.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's in every industry, but it seems especially prevalent in board games that there really is this hype machine of when a game is released, oh man, can't wait to play it, oh man, can't wait to play all the reviews, and then it's like a week later, what's next?
No, the hype train. I think there's actually a better name. Yeah, that's it.
Comes into play.
And
fear of missing out if you don't know.
I mean, especially if you're a reviewer like us and stuff.
Right, of course. And in some ways I feel bad too, although I think, we try to do older games too, but part of it is with reviewers always having the newest, latest, because that's what people want to see, and it feeds into this cycle where
and it's
older
interesting,
games go away.
Like, for example, on Kickstarter, someone says, like, yeah, we're delayed by a few months. I can see people they get really angry. Meanwhile, I'm like, I'm still getting my product.
Right. And I think it leads to a larger thing where people don't play their older games as much, which is sad because you don't get to experience the depth of them either.
Oh yeah, how many games have we only had like a few play? Like,
yeah, that's not even with us who like actually have to play them.
Like that's why some of the games it's so weird. Our older games that we have are ones that are like, man, we used to play this like 5 times a week or something. Like
right.
Legendary, it's because we got it early. I feel like we have so many games under our belt. Because it was just one of our early adopters.
Because and also it used to be, we'd look at our shelf and be like, oh, there's 12 games. Which one should we play this week? Now it's like, I think it's rare if we have a game night where we don't play at least one game that is brand new. It never happens anymore.
Yeah.
There's always at least one game no one's played before, which is maybe good, maybe bad. I don't know. But yeah, there's this strange thing where it's just very difficult for people to understand which board games should we print? What do people want? Because maybe the distributors are right. Maybe they go and reprint those old games that it's sad they're not around anymore, and they are duds and sit on the shelf. Which it's a pessimistic thing, but maybe that is what would happen. So. I don't know. I mean, maybe a kind of a half solution is digital version.
That's what I was gonna say, because that's a good way to bring them in, and it's not space. Doesn't take up as much space, and usually you can revamp rules a little bit without having to do component construction.
I think another one is Kickstarter, because that's a way you can do reprints and know how much if
the problem with the reason why I like digital a bit more is that to me feels like a long-term answer. But the Kickstarter one, once again, maybe you don't have the money to support the Kickstarter during that time, and you missed out that 1 month.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, maybe you're not receiving a paycheck or something.
No, it's something that I don't think about as much because we've been covering Kickstarter and stuff for so long. But if you're someone who just started playing board games, you want to play whatever game, odds are if you didn't find that Kickstarter that was 4 months ago, you're out of luck.
The other issue with Kickstarter is you have all this hype that 1 month it's happening, and then it's like, because they don't have the game produced. They're getting the funding to produce the game. And they mentioned this, and I think both of them actually mentioned it. The hype just disappears then. And when the game comes out, that's why a lot of Kickstarters I feel like don't. I remember as a store owner, I didn't want to buy Kickstarter games.
Right.
Because I'm like, everyone who bought it probably already bought it. There could be some that do, but I don't really trust that.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I do like the digital answer for another reason, which is because it's kind of long term. Obviously, it's always there. That could even be more of a marketing push where, because it's in more people's heads, it's easier to access. It could lead to the physical version being printed more often. I think that all of the digital games that Asmodee Digital does, the Splendors and what have yous, are probably more prevalent physically because they have kind of more mind presence of people who don't always look at the board game shelf in the store, but they look at Steam and they see that game and know that logo or something. That's one interesting thing, but I don't know if we will ever really get a perfect system the way it seems like video games have to predict these things.
Even then, there's it's hard. We keep comparing to other industries, but there's always unique things that you have at science-based. But another one that I think it's important to point out is, for example, let's take a video game like Red Dead.
I'll take it.
You're playing it and enjoying it. If I want to, I have to buy my own copy and the system for whatever it would play on. You have Wingspan, you like it. We can just play your copy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another thing that you have to be worried about too, is board games. You have to think is this a game that makes, ignoring the unique games, that people would buy their own copy or different? Because this was a long time ago. Someone mentioned how he liked Star Wars Imperial Assault. and he bought his own copy, but it's even though he's played the game a lot, he's never played his copy. That's like been on the shelf.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm thinking maybe a potential solution is because the board game industry is relatively niche right now, even though it's growing and growing and growing, compared to all these other industries, it's pretty small. Do you think that in a future world where if we
survive the apocalypse,
we're still standing in a year's time, if as many people played board games as go out to the movies on Friday night, would it be less of a risk? And then publishers would say, "Oh, print 100,000 because it's so popular, it'll be around, they'll sell eventually." Do you think part of the problem is that the market is just smaller right now?
I do think that's a big deal.
Okay, we settled it.
I think if you're able to make it into like Hasbro, the reason Hasbro can always make sure because they're in Targets and Walmarts, your very big generic stores. And some board games have made it there. But if you're not in there, you have to be very worried, all the time if you're going to be able to find enough to because if you're sitting on a shelf, that's a huge loss of money. And especially even then, you might not even want to do an expansion for that game, so that hurts the fans and stuff. So it's very worrisome because it takes up a lot of space.
Yeah.
So you might not, even if you didn't go bankrupt, you could be like, I don't have the space now if I make a new game to produce a lot, which in their turn, then you have a high demand maybe. So it's all this balancing is the issue. And I think part of the problem is I don't know if we'll find an answer if we're still growing. As you mentioned, we're growing hugely. I mean, so many games are coming out each week, let alone a month. And until I think we start plateauing, which I think we're going to be hitting soon, but that's just my own gut feeling predictions. This has nothing to do with any kind of actual research and degree. I feel like once we hit that plateau, though, that's when we can come up with an answer.
It's like right now it's impossible because we don't know where we're going to land. So how can we make a system when it's still changing so much?
Exactly. Yeah. Like once we know, once all the game companies maybe pull back a little bit on their release schedule and maybe Kickstarter cools down a little bit, maybe then we can be like, all right, so how can we make a better prediction schedule? Not only when it's coming and when it will arrive, because that's always a big thing, especially with Kickstarters and things like that. And maybe even just better, manufacturing procedures too. Just make sure all those are in date. Because I feel like I've heard people switching around with manufacturers every now and then. So I don't know how often that occurs.
Yeah, part of it also is because so much of it's overseas in China, it's even harder to predict and how long it takes and the shipping and whatnot. And if things happen between our nations, Chinese New Year, that's another thing. I think I came up with another great solution though, which
stop playing board games.
Yeah, that's it. Which people won't like and I don't really like, but maybe in the future it's a possible thing. It's a little outside the box. But as we continue to develop virtual reality, and even more so than that, I think AR, augmented reality. If there's a world where technology is to the point where maybe board games you put on a pair of gloves and goggles, and so you still sit around a table, and maybe there's still haptic feedback, so you can feel the dice, but it's not you don't buy a box, you don't have to worry about space. It's a digital virtual thing.
I mean, that's the drawback for our digital idea.
What's the thing called in Star Trek?
Holodeck.
Holodeck, that's what it is.
I mean, that's the issue with the digital front. I mean, we mentioned it and praised it as an idea, but there is the issue that if you really like that or need that physical
So that's why I'm saying AR maybe is the bridge between those two worlds.
No, I mean
the hollow chess.
Even some people need either they need because Braille or something.
No, there's definitely
it's or you rather own a physical CD than the digital.
There's always going to be a crowd that wants that, but we went from CDs to MP3s. I know it's different, but those transitions could happen. Maybe it's something that offsets it. Certainly, maybe not replaces it, but
yeah, and it's definitely something we do need. I mean, while I said we should avoid, or I not avoid that. We can't find an answer. It is something we should be thinking about because video games are having this problem too. It's just the idea of preserving the library of games that exist because it does, as Travis X says, it's terrible that you don't have the ability to be able to experience this game, not because it was bad, but because it was just, it's gone.
Yeah, or like in recent memory, Battlestar Galactica, one of my favorite games ever. You can't buy it anymore outside of eBay for like $300. And it's just, it is a shame. And it happens so often because there are so many games and stores can only carry so much. I mean, Battlestar is a different issue, it's a licensing thing, but it's still all kind of part of the same sadness.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, so I feel good. I think we made a lot of headway in this conversation.
We have solved the problem. There you go.
Ding, ding, ding. Maybe you guys in the comments want to chime in. I'm sure that you do, about your thoughts on this issue, how you've been affected by it, or if you have ideas to actually solve it in the future. I don't know. How much you hate digital games and you love feeling the dice. Because we do too. I don't know. Let us know in those comments below, or find us on Twitter and everything. And as I said, if you just kept listening to this and didn't heed my instructions, definitely click those comments, the description, and read the actual articles themselves, straight from the mouths of those horses.
They're very interesting. They're great reads.
Yeah, and both those guys, by the way, have very interesting blogs with really cool stuff about design and the industry, like almost on a weekly basis, that you should check out. So otherwise, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this special Roll for Crit talk. My name's Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And we'll see you next time.
Hey, if you like what you saw, don't forget to subscribe and like this video for more excellent board game content.
Heck yeah!